Welcome to Her Story, the podcast that brings to life the stories of incredible women throughout history. Each episode uncovers the remarkable lives, achievements, and struggles of women who shaped the world, beyond the textbooks and headlines. Join us as we celebrate their legacies and inspire new generations with tales of courage, resilience, and trailblazing spirit. In today's episode, I am delighted to welcome back Andrea Zuvich to discuss Barbara Villiers, one of the many mistresses of Charles II. Andrea is a British-American anthropologist and historian, specialising in the House of Stuart, reigning from 1603 to 1714. She is the author of The Stuarts in 100 Facts and Sexuality in Stuart Britain, and Ravenous, A Life of Charles II's Most Infamous Mistress, which is the newest major biography of Barbara Villiers in 40 years. Zuvich hosts the 17th Century Lady podcast and the live-streamed online history show, Stuart Saturday Live. Zuvich was one of the original developers of the Garden History Tours at Kensington Palace and is one of the co-founders of the Stuart History Festival, which is, of course, dedicated to Stuart history. A professional audiobook narrator as well, she lives in Derbyshire, England with her family. You can find her on social media as 17th Century Lady. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome back to the podcast, Andrea. How are you?
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing really well, thanks.
So today we're discussing Barbara Villiers, one of the many mistresses of Charles II. Could you tell us why you wanted to write a book on Barbara?
Well, Barbara's one of those really glamorous, very well-known people from the period, and usually I end up researching lesser-known figures, um, and there was just something about her, and I remember when I was researching my previous book, a reference book, it's Sex and Sexuality in Stuart Britain. I was researching her, and I found that the last published work, most major work on her, was done in something like 1980. And so I said, I posted something on Facebook, I believe, and one of my friends said, "Well, maybe you should write the next biography." And I thought, no, I don't think I'm up to that. I don't think I can do that. But then I thought, why not? Just give it a go and, give it a shot. And I did, and I did find out so much about her. She's one of these people who was quite a larger than life character. And so it's nice because you have this preconceived idea of someone, especially someone so famous. And then when you do the research yourself and you come across other things, another picture does tend to form. And that's the case with her. I found her a very fascinating figure to research.
I'm surprised that there was such a gap in the biographies. Obviously you said 40 years later, there was
Mhm.
still nothing new on it. So that's quite
Yeah.
surprising.
Yeah, it was very surprising. But she's certainly a very influential figure of the Stuart period. Mhm.
So, moving on to Barbara, could you tell us when she was born and who were her parents?
Right. Well, Barbara was born in 1640 in November. We don't have the exact date for her birth, but we know that she was baptized later in the month at St. Margaret's, which is right next to Westminster Abbey, and it's still there today. And I double checked with some of the archivists at Westminster Abbey and the nearby church, and they definitely did have her listed there as her baptism. And so it was very interesting because in quite a number of places online, for example, if you were to look her up, you'd find different dates of for her birth, and I thought that was a bit strange. So I definitely know she was born in 1640, and her parents were were both aristocrats. Um, and she was related to the very famous, the very infamous George Villiers or Villiers, depends on how you want to pronounce it, but I usually say Villiers. Um, and of course, he was the famous one that we remember from being to do with James the First and Sixth, and also Charles the First. So he was very notorious, very handsome, and that was very important. Okay, so the Villiers, or the Villiers family, were a very important family in this period, and something that most of them had was extremely good looks. So they were exceptionally handsome. Um, so yes, they were definitely one of the infamous families of the time. And so yeah, by the time Barbara was born, King Charles I had already had some troubles in Scotland, the land of his birth, with the Bishops' Wars. But Barbara was, uh, as I said, born into this notorious and powerful family. Her grandfather was Edward Villiers, and that was the elder half brother of George Villiers, the first Duke of Buckingham, who I mentioned earlier. And so his eldest son was with Barbara St. John, and that was William Villiers, second Lord Grandison, who was born in 1614. He married Mary Baining, who was a wealthy young heiress, and they were married in 1639. Barbara was the only child or the only surviving child of that union, and she was born, as I said, sometime in November 1640. So she was not the first Barbara in her family. There was also the her her grandmother, Barbara St. John, and they're related to the famous St. John family at Lydiard Trigos in Wiltshire.
What do we know about Barbara's childhood? Obviously, she's been born into the Civil War, so it's quite a turbulent time in history.
Hmm. Well, she had a very difficult childhood, actually. She was only a toddler when her father was in the wars and was fatally wounded. And so she very likely didn't have any idea or memory of her father. And so she was fatherless for a great deal of her childhood. And as the war progressed, her family fell on even worse times. Her mother was now a widow, and they lost financially, and they didn't have the protection of the the father anymore, of course, her husband. And so things became very difficult for Barbara's mother and for herself as well. And so she, even though she was an aristocrat, she had this amazing pedigree and all this, she was effectively penniless. So she was, as many of these rich people were at this time, these wealthy aristocrats, they became less wealthy and even, you could say, impoverished. So I believe this was very, very important, and it was very, it had a sort of strong effect upon her that would last forever, in that she wanted to have the fine things in life. She wanted beautiful dresses because she couldn't have them when she was a child. She wanted all the beautiful, delicious food, the opulence, the everything. She wanted that because she couldn't have any of that when she was a little girl. And she also lacked her father. Her mother did remarry to a cousin of her deceased husband's, and he was also a Villiers. And this was, well, we don't really know what kind of relationship that was. It could have been because she needed to have some financial help. She needed to have a husband to protect her and her child. And so we don't know if it was a love match or just a necessity. But this new marriage, when Barbara was about 8, when she became this man's stepdaughter, he took them to his place in London. So they were in the country for some time, and so they moved to London, and that is where things started to get going for her because Barbara inherited the famous Villiers beauty, and already as a young teen, she was really becoming very beautiful. And that beauty was going to be the source of her power.
When did Barbara first get married and who was her husband?
Well, Barbara, as I said, became very beautiful, and she had many admirers at the time. And one of them was Philip Stanhope, who was quite a Lothario. He was quite a womanizer. And she fell for him so completely. First love, as we know, can be very, very powerful, and she certainly succumbed to that. And they had everything in common. Everything was perfect for them. They had the same the same views on politics and both wanting the restoration of the king and everything. But Barbara, as I mentioned before, had nothing. She had no money. And he was already a widower, and he wanted nothing less than a beautiful heiress. He had to have someone with a lot of money. So it didn't matter that Barbara was so compatible with him. So they did have a sexual relationship. And of course, at that time, that wasn't so great for a lady. So she was pretty much used goods. So not really great for the marriage market, really. That being said, she was still very, very attractive. She had a really exciting personality and great looks. So other people were buzzing around, and one of them was Roger Palmer. Now, Roger was a very pensive, very studious, good, very well-behaved man. Um, and he was utterly besotted by her. Um, his father warned him that she would only bring him trouble. And I think he probably wished he had followed his father's advice, for his father said something to the effect of, she will make you the most miserable person in the world. And so nevertheless, he did propose to Barbara, and she accepted him. Now, we don't know exactly why, but I think it's likely because that he was offering her a very comfortable position. He had land, he had ambition, he had all the makings of a man who was on the up. And he had wealth. So it must have been something like that. I think he was utterly charmed and beguiled by her, and she had just been in this really long-term relationship with Philip Stanhope, and her heart was broken because they couldn't be together. He wouldn't marry her, and so Roger came along as a sort of knight in shining armor, so to speak, and so she accepted him, and they were married. And so this was 1650s. So near the end of 1659. And soon enough, unfortunately, um, poor Roger, he he found that she was indeed beautiful, but she had no intention of being a good wife to him. And she began to see Philip again, and and Roger found out about this and said, "Look, I'm not going to let you make me a cuckold.
Mm.
You are going to behave yourself, or I'm going to take you away to the countryside, okay? And then you're not going to have any more fun with your boyfriend and everything." And so she, in very typical Barbara fashion, she ignored him and continued to do what she wanted because she wanted to please herself, and she still had a great deal of passion for Philip. She didn't find Roger very attractive in the same way because he was so different. He was, as I said, studious, and she wanted fun. She wanted to have all the things that she was denied when she was little. And he just wanted a quiet life with his beautiful lady. And he just wanted her to assume the role that she had signed up for. Um, but that was not to be. So she continued her relationship with Philip. And Roger found out and made good on his threat. And he took her away to his family house in Dorney. So it's Dorney Court near Windsor Castle, in that area in Buckinghamshire. Um, and, and Barbara was utterly miserable there. She hated it. She thought her husband was dull, and life in this backwater was just boring. So she was absolutely bored out of her mind. And she was sending these really passionate letters to Philip saying that she would go anywhere in the world with him if he would just take her. Um, and so we have this, she just continued with this relationship with Philip. But shortly, soon enough, she contracted smallpox, which was very dangerous back then. If it didn't kill the person who had it, it could very often leave terrible scars. And for someone who's, I should say, maybe one of her greatest attributes was her beauty, this was potentially a game changer. Luckily for her, Miss Lucky, she didn't get any scarring at all, and she was fine. But she ended up having immunity from smallpox as a result because she already had it, and so she was fine. So she was a very robust woman for most of her life. So that's something that we find throughout her life.
Was going to say to survive not only smallpox but also have no evidence of smallpox is a rarity in itself.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I had chicken pox and it's all over me. I have scars everywhere. So I'm like, wow, you didn't even get anything on your face. Wow. Lucky.
It's that Villiers charm, that Villiers look, it's just there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, how did Barbara attract the attention of Charles II?
Right. Well, this is where things get very interesting. So, as I said, she was having a terrible time with her husband, Roger, who was also pretty fed up with the situation. But the only thing that they had in common was that they both wanted to see Charles II restored to the throne. And so they worked together and they went overseas. They went over the channel and they met with the exiled king, as he was at that point. And they came with a considerable amount of money. And Barbara was present and gave the king the money. And of course, he couldn't fail to notice how beautiful and charming she was, and he found her a lot of fun. Um, so there are some researchers who may have in the past said that Roger was a sort of pimp at this point. I really disagree with that. He still loved his wife. He wanted his wife to be his wife. And but he also wanted to serve his king because he was a royalist. Barbara was a royalist. So they were in these secret royalist circles, and they were doing what they thought was their bit for the royalist cause. Now, I do believe that at this point, at this meeting, Barbara and Charles probably began their sexual relationship, um, because they both had such a high libido. They were both very compatible. Um, so as she was with Philip, she got on very well with Charles and he with her. So there are some letters, I think, between Charles and his sister Minette, who was the Duchess d'Orléans. She was married to Philippe, who was the Sun King or Louis XIV's younger brother. So there were all these connections. But in one of these letters, she was, I think, complaining about his doting on someone, and it's someone new on the scene. And I think we have reason to suspect that that person was Barbara. So he was already thinking about Barbara. Um, and so within a few months, we have General Monk leading the, coup. So to bring back the king. And so he was restored. And by that point, he was already really into Barbara, and it's often said that he spent his first night back in London after his restoration, uh, in Barbara's arms, and that's very likely because these two had quite a sexual relationship, very intense.
Poor Roger. That's all I can think is poor Roger.
Yes, I came to think about poor Roger quite often.
Where was she popular at court? Like, did people go, oh, we need to keep in favor with her because she's really up there with the king?
Well, yes and no. I mean, as she gained in power and position, she didn't always have the nicest behavior, but definitely she was this uber glamorous, super sexy woman. And anyone who wanted to have access to the king had to get through her first. So if you weren't doing well with Barbara, you weren't likely to get access to the king. So she was, in many respects, a gatekeeper. Mhm.
Did Barbara's position change when Charles married Catherine of Braganza?
No. She was, in effect, the queen by this point. He married Catherine in 1662, so that's 2 years into his very strong relationship with Barbara. And as I said, she had a lot of power at this time. People wanted to copy her fashion um, style. They wanted to see her at the plays. We have diarists like Samuel Pepys who became absolutely obsessed with her, and he would go to the theatre, to the playhouses, which were really quite popular again during the Restoration. Um, and he would sometimes pay more attention to her than to the actual drama that was on stage. So there was a lot of this, vying for attention, and this this sort of these factions grew when when Catherine came over in 1662. Uh, Barbara wasn't going to show much respect for this lady, unfortunately. And Catherine had a very raw deal, really, because she was prepared to do everything in her power to be a great wife and queen. She was very pious and dutiful, and that was very much looked upon as very positive things. So she was a very good positive role model at that period for what women should aspire to be. Whereas Barbara was this known promiscuous woman. She was very clearly an adulteress, and she was quite ostentatious in her dress and in her everything. She ended up having amazingly ornate, opulent apartments. So she was really relishing this position as, mistress. Um, so it was very much that. I don't know if we have time for me to mention that Barbara was heavily pregnant when Catherine came to England, and there was this rumor that Barbara was going to have her lying in, and that's when a woman is getting ready to deliver her baby. She would have her lying in at Hampton Court Palace. And this was exactly the same location for the honeymoon for Charles and Catherine. So there's this sort of malevolent, um, a slightly bitchy streak, if you allow me to say that. That was, there really is no other word for her, I'm afraid, um, because she knew that that was her position. She was the queen in all but name, and she was determined to show this new lady, the new woman on the scene, who was boss.
Do we know what Charles thought about Barbara kind of feuding with Catherine?
Well, there's this infamous situation called the bedchamber crisis that we call now. And it's because it's a situation in which Barbara wanted to be the first lady of the bedchamber for the Queen. So this is incredibly awkward. Okay, so she was going to be around his wife. Okay, so this is so awkward on so many levels for poor Catherine to be around this woman who has already had at least two of her husband's children, and 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 to be in her so close to her every day. It's awful. And this position was a highly coveted, very uh, honorable position. And many people thought that Barbara really wasn't right for this. But when everything kicked off, because Catherine said, absolutely not, I'm not going to have her as my first lady of the bedchamber. You must be mad, all of you. Um, he said, you have to. And Barbara was having absolute meltdowns because she was starting to have these. She was becoming famous for her tantrums. So if she didn't get her way, she would absolutely throw one, and you must. I will have that position. You will give it to me, and so yeah, it led to a very volatile situation, as you can imagine. But ultimately, uh, Barbara was so livid about not being given the position that she sort of had so much shouting at the king that he's like, okay, just do it. He went along with it and he sided with Barbara. And Catherine Catherine was ultimately lost this battle, and Barbara did get this position. So very, very difficult for her there.
Obviously, Charles and Barbara were together for many years. Why did their relationship begin to kind of sour and, they separated?
Well, it was mainly Barbara's personality, her behavior, her tantrums, her volatile nature. He started to get a little weary of it all. Because of course, as a king, he has a lot on his mind. He had a lot on his mind, and there were numerous problems throughout the country that he had to try to work on. And so he didn't need all this excess drama, and she was very good at creating a lot of drama. Um, and so he just became weary about it. And there were all these fresh-faced beauties at court, and people, some who were easier to deal with, um, and pretty soon after the bedchamber crisis in the following year, there was a newcomer called Francis Stewart, and that led him to have a sort of uh, merry chase after her, really. Um, Francis didn't want to be his mistress, so that he didn't achieve that. But um, Barbara was trying to be one of those friends for her. So she was involving herself because if she could control this young girl, she could still have the power over the whole dynamic. Yeah.
What did Barbara do once she was becoming no longer the royal favorite?
Well, she also was very promiscuous. She was not faithful. See, that's something that we could compare with Charles's other mistresses. For example, Nell Gwyn. Once she became his mistress, that was it. There was no other talk of another man in her life. She was faithful to him. We cannot say that about Barbara. Despite having the most powerful man in in Britain, that wasn't enough. She yearned for the excitement of new lovers. And and she wasn't a snob either about this. She would take her lovers from any social station, anywhere, you know. Um, so, so he also thought that this was a bit lacking in good judgment as well, because she would take anyone to her bed, whoever she fancied. And in some respects, if you have a king, and you also go for the lackey as well. Yeah. So, but yeah, so he started getting a bit tired of her tantrums and her promiscuity, and and so he just got a bit tired of that. But the thing that held them together was the fact that they had a number of children by this point. So we're looking at late 60s. So by 1670, he gave her the estate of Nonsuch, and he gave her the titles that she became known by, especially Duchess of Cleveland. Um, and and lots of people tend to assume that that was a cutoff point. That's it. I'm severing my ties with her. But when I was in the archives at Chatsworth, that was when I found these letters from Charles to Barbara. And it was very clear that he continued to have warm feelings towards her. And he even had some jealousy when he found out that she was carrying on in the 1670s with some French nobleman, because in this period she went off, she moved. So that was in effect when she finished her like maîtresse en titre um, position, really. And she moved to France. She moved to Paris. She was at the French court. So she was on friendly terms with Charles's cousin, Louis the 14th. And so she was there for some time. She did not stay away from rumor and scandal that continued to follow her there because she had that kind of lifestyle. She was up for fun and intrigue and passion and all sorts of inter entertainment, and so that was her jam. Yeah.
Do we know how Barbara felt when Charles himself died in 1685?
Well, she was in England when he died. She was in his presence only a few days before his death. Uh, John Evelyn, the famous diarist, wrote about that the king was toying with his concubines, and then a few days later, all was dust. And I find that diary entry really quite moving because you have the glimpse of it was sort of a snapshot of how Charles II lived. He had all these, this bevy of beauties, and they were living it up and enjoying themselves. And then he died, and in very unpleasant circumstances, of course, after after his his health issue was exacerbated by the help and attention of all those physicians. Yeah. He was a very important figure in Barbara's life. So we don't know how she reacted to his death, but it would have impacted her.
When I was doing my research, I discovered that Barbara remarried in the early 18th century.
Hmm.
Why was this such a disastrous second marriage?
Oh dear. Here we go. This man, Robert Fielding, he was also called Beau because he was really, really handsome. And she loved handsome men. They would make her very weak in the knees. So loved, she loved them. So this guy came along, and um, I didn't know this, but in my research, I found that he had been a gigolo for wealthy women. So he was someone who was always looking for wealth from from women, and he was quite good at that. So shortly after Barbara's estranged husband, Roger Palmer, died, she was she began being courted by this Fielding fellow. And he made her feel young and beautiful and all the things that she used to be, because he was very skillful in this, in his seduction. Now, he married her, and very shortly after that, he began to be very violent. He was an abusive thug, and she could well have been killed by him because there were incidents where she was being beaten by him because he wanted to sell her things. He wanted to, and she was in her 60s by this point. And so he wanted to sell her things to make money, and she was in a horrible situation. But something happened in that some women came to the house after they'd heard that she'd have some had some problems with this guy, and one of them said that she was married to this Fielding guy, and this was very interesting because if he was married to someone else, then he had no legal right to Barbara's person or things at all. And so there was this sensational trial, and she took him to court for bigamy. And they found that he was a bigamist, and her marriage to him was annulled. And so she was safe after that. But that was a very very terrible episode in her life. And for the first time, she started to have poor health after this. I think the abuse was just dreadful. And for someone who had reached such heights of power and glamour to be reduced to this level of domestic violence is quite shocking.
Do we know about much about Barbara's life after this terrible episode?
She had a very quiet life. The cultural zeitgeist had changed enormously under the late Stuart. So whereas we think of the Restoration as being a period of some hedonism in the court, the period of the reigns of William and Mary, and followed by Queen Anne, had a very different vibe to them. It was a lot more religious. It was a lot more moralistic, and Barbara didn't like that. She didn't like having moral judgments on her, and that was one of the reasons why she left France when she did, was because Louis XIV, morganatic wife, Madame de Maintenon, was very pious and very judgmental, and she didn't want any of that seen. So she came back to England, but only to find that subsequent reigns were very much the same, just Protestant. Um, and so, yeah, that was the situation. So she kept her head low, but that didn't stop her family from having some issues as well. Her daughter was the youngest daughter, whose father was likely John Churchill, first Duke of Marlborough, had a, an arrangement. She had a relationship with a gentleman, and she had a child out of wedlock. And this was considered so horrible at this point that there was a great deal of shame involved, and so this girl was sent to a nunnery, and she stayed there for the rest of her life in France. But this is quite ironic given the fact that her mother had numerous illegitimate children. So you could see the difference where, it was a little bit a little frowned upon slightly, but generally accepted. And then this other time where it was vehemently stamped down upon.
I think it's quite sad, isn't it? But it just shows how much changed in just 40 years.
Mm,
Well,
yeah,
yeah, 40 years. How it's, yeah, it's a bit like, oh, you are illegitimate, but, you're still the king's child, so we respect you. And then 40 years later, it's like, whoa, what the hell?
yeah. Well, I think that happens throughout history. You see these cultural shifts. It's like a pendulum swinging from, super super conservative to super liberal, if for modern words. So it goes backwards and forwards, you know. And I think we see that a lot throughout the history.
Do we know what caused Barbara to die?
Yes. So she had ill health following that whole situation with Fielding, but she started to get edema. So she had really bad swelling in her legs and throughout her body. So this famed body that she had, despite having numerous children and everything, it started to swell quite badly, and so she looked quite altered. Some have said that she was disfigured by this point, as a result of her medical conditions, which could not be treated during the Stuart period. They can be treated today, thankfully. So yay. But so she suffered quite badly at the end, I would imagine, without this help. So she more than likely died from heart failure as a result of this untreated condition.
What was Barbara missed by her children? Was her death a devastation for her kids?
Hmm, it's a very mixed bag there because she didn't have the most maternal sort of carry on with her children. And indeed, there are some stories of her having been rather cruel to them at times. I mean, but what we have to remember about Barbara is that she always sought the material comfort and advantage of her children as much as possible. So she did try to get them advantageous marriages, to keep them in secured alliances so that they would be okay in the future. Where, we don't know exactly how much they missed her, but she was their mother, so I would imagine there was something. Yeah.
Does Barbara have a legacy?
Yes, she has a legacy of having been the, I would say, a very infamous, powerful woman in a time when women were expected to behave a certain way, and she didn't want to live by other people's standards. She wanted to enjoy herself. She wanted to have her own pleasures. And this is something that we don't see very often in this period because it could lead to social ostracization, and all this. So she was lucky in that in the spheres in which she lived, she could behave in such a manner.
Towards the end of the episode, I like to ask my guests five fun history questions. So, firstly, have you got a historical pet peeve?
Yes, and I think I slipped into it a few times in this episode, I'm afraid. Talking about historical people in the present tense, and I did that. Oops. Yes, because they were in the past, so I like to put them in the past. I know this is a bit controversial because people do like the present tense, but that's just me.
Have you got a favorite historical building that you like to visit?
Oh, yes, 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 yes. I love Blenheim Palace so much. It is so dear to me. I loved it. I've loved it forever. And yeah, my husband and I got married there, and it's extra special, and it has that connection to the Stuarts, and so yeah, I love it so much.
If you could ask Barbara one question, what would it be and why?
Oh, that's hard. Um, I think I think I would ask her if she genuinely loved the king,
Mhm.
you know? Because sometimes her actions don't really show the kind of love that perhaps us romantics consider, real love. Yeah, just I wanted to know if it was totally genuine on her part. Mm.
Have you got a favorite historical figure?
Oh, this is terrible. Oh my, I don't know how anyone could answer that. Um, I I think so. It's so. You know what? I'm gonna say it. William Shakespeare. He's the guy. He's the guy that got me into all of this. So I wouldn't be able to do any history if I hadn't gone down the rabbit hole of Shakespearean drama and all that. He really changed my life. Yes,
He
Shakespeare.
takes number one.
He does. And then I'd have to go with people like um get all these wonderful Stuart people like Rupert of the Rhine and of course, Barbara. I think she's fascinating. Oh, yes. And she wasn't, we don't know exactly where she was buried. I forgot to mention that because she was such an infamous person that she didn't want anything dodgy to be happening with her grave. because there was a lot of dodgy stuff happening with graves in the Stuart period. So, like opening them up and taking bits of mummified stuff away. And yes, you could read about that in my biography. There is a section there, and also Pepys kissed the remains of Catherine of Valois. So all sorts of dodgy stuff. So they might not have wanted her to be desecrated and all that. So she was buried at a church in Chiswick, and the location of that her grave is not known.
Mm. Now, would you say that's your favorite historical fact? Because that would be my next question.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, yeah,
Would you go
because she,
grave hunting today? Just go look for her today, would you?
I had a friend who lives in Chiswick. Go and look for it. Couldn't find it. Yeah.
I'll find her. She's gone. Thank you so much for coming back today and giving us such a vivid description of Barbara's life.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to her story. If there's a historical woman who inspires you and you'd like to share her story on the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Get in touch at unholytudor@gmail.com. Until next time, keep celebrating the incredible women who've shaped our world.